Recently, I participated in my second ever game jam, Untitled Game Jam number 89, and about a week ago, I submitted my game Grav-Stack and it got played by more people than any other game I've made so far. In this video, I will document the entire process of making and submitting a game to a jam, and I will also go over what I learned from this experience and give my advice to anyone who wants to participate in game jams themselves. So without further ado, this is Making a Game in a Week for Untitled Game Jam 89. I wanted to see when the next Untitled Game Jam would start, so I found it on itch.io and I saw that it had already started with a full week before the submission deadline. I was initially going to wait it out and join the next one, but then I saw the theme of the jam. It was Death is Useful. I really liked it, and with a week I knew I could make a game with that theme, so I started thinking of possible game ideas. Now, when coming up with ideas for game jams, there's nothing wrong with just picking the first idea you can think of, even if you think other people will come up with the same idea, because the execution and the way you turn your idea into a game is more important than the idea itself. As for what I came up with, my thoughts immediately went to a platformer game, where the corpses of your previous attempts could be used as platforms, but I felt like there was a better idea in there that I could explore, so I gave it some more thought, and after a while it just kind of clicked in my head. I realized the idea would work much better as a puzzle game, where you control many objects and their deaths help you get to the end of the level. With my newfound motivation, I opened a new game maker project and I typed up the core concept of my game in a note. Grav-Stack would be a game about moving many boxes by rotating gravity and using the boxes that have been impaled by spikes to reach the end of the level and solve the puzzle. That was the core concept for my game. It's important that you write down the most core parts of your game before you draw a single sprite or write a single line of code. The core parts of my game are moving boxes, solving puzzles, and impaling boxes on spikes. After writing those down, I started development. It was getting a bit late, but I wanted a minimum viable product before I went to sleep. A minimum viable product is a playable version of the core ideas that you just wrote down. So a minimum viable product for Grav-Stack would be a level where you can rotate gravity to move boxes and the boxes interact with spikes. This screenshot shows what a minimum viable product for Grav-Stack looks like. In the bottom right of the screen you'll see the compass, a visual indicator with a large arrow that points in the direction of up and a smaller arrow that points in the direction of gravity. The compass is what controls and rotates gravity, making it the most important object to get right. If players can't visually understand how your game works, they won't have fun playing your game. The visual design of the compass and boxes stays the same throughout the game's development. You may also notice that the sprite for the box has what looks like a light on it. This was another attempt at a way of visually conveying a mechanic indicating what state the boxes were in, but this failed. The idea was that the boxes could only change gravity once every box was on the ground, and the little light on every box would hint at how that works. Green when they could change gravity, yellow when they were on the ground but couldn't change gravity because other boxes were still in the air, red when they were in the air themselves, and black when they were disabled by a spike. This failed, not only because the indicators themselves were too small and the boxes too fast for players to notice the indicators in the first place, but because it didn't even work properly and was forgotten about before it could be fixed, or more likely, removed. Poor development decisions aside, I coded the boxes to fall and collide with the walls and other boxes no matter the gravity. I got the compass controller up and running and ended up with the minimum viable product that I wanted. Satisfied with how productive I've been over the past few hours, I went to sleep at about 1 AM thinking about what I was going to do tomorrow. This was my first real day of development. I woke up and immediately wrote down what I wanted for this game. I wrote down some features, but I quickly realized that writing down menus would help me plan out what to make easier, so I reformatted my list. I wanted the game to have a lot of levels. Ideally there would be 50, but realistically I'd be happy with just 30 if I didn't have the time to make 50. This thought process would not last long as I quickly planned my game around having 50 levels. I started by making the main menu. The menu design I ended up making was, in my opinion, simple yet visually pleasing. I made the buttons and immediately shifted my attention towards implementing the level editor. Now you may be wondering why I'm so insistent on adding a level editor before anything else, especially in a game jam where time is a bit limited. Fortunately, I've experienced making level editors for these kinds of puzzle games, and I knew making one for this game would be easy. I won't go into details because the video is already long enough as is, but a level in Grav-Stack is really just a long string of characters, a large number where each digit corresponds to a location in a level and the value of the digit corresponds to the object at that location. The level editor is just a user-friendly way of changing the large number, and when the level is played, the game places all the objects in the level based on the large number. Did that make sense? It's okay if it didn't. The point is that my backwards approach to level design made designing levels much more convenient in the long run. Being able to store the levels as a number meant that storing 50 levels was as easy as running 50 lines of code. And having the level editor meant being able to create, test, and tweak levels quickly and efficiently. This was also around the time I started working on the soundtrack. The first song I made was originally going to be a theme for some of the levels, but it ended up becoming the menu theme, probably because I used it as the menu theme throughout the game's development and got used to hearing it upon opening the game. Satisfied with my progress and productivity, I went to bed and ended day 1. The second full day of Grav-Stack's development has much less to talk about, but that doesn't mean I was any less productive. This day was mostly focused on user interface design, something that is really boring and tedious. I started at the level select screen, a 10x5 grid showing which levels you've unlocked and which ones you've beaten, although I only added the check mark showing which levels you've beaten later in the game's development. I also made the level complete screen, the most tedious and annoying part of the game jam. It was boring to make, but when it was complete, you could press the hide button to retract the UI element and see the level after you complete it. You can restart the level, copy the level string, and return to the level editor. If you're not in the level editor, the last 2 buttons will say next level and return to level select instead. UI design is something that most beginner game developers, myself included, tend to forego when making games. It's not something you usually think about as a designer, but it is something you definitely think about as a player, so although UI design isn't a very engaging topic for a YouTube video, that doesn't make it any less important. Day 3 is when I started working on something I don't usually think about when making games, and that's sound effects and sound design. I wanted the game to have a satisfying feel to it, and good sound design goes a long way in achieving that. I felt like giving the boxes collision sounds would be a good first step, so I searched around online, and I found exactly what I needed. An online sound effect pack that included wood impact sounds. I immediately downloaded it and used the sounds in my game. Now, whenever a box collides with something, it plays one of 15 different impact sounds. Continuing the theme of adding sound to the game, I also planned out the songs for the soundtrack. I wanted the menu and the editor to have separate tracks, and I also wanted 5 tracks that would play over the 50 levels, with the music changing every 10 levels. This would mean an OST with 7 tracks, something that I was very much capable of making within the time I had. Ending the day, I went to sleep satisfied with the productivity of my sound effect and music work. Overall, day 3 was very similar to day 2. Not much to say, but a lot of work was done behind the scenes. Day 4 is when I really started working on the levels themselves. I added a new saw blade object that cut up boxes, and I added detail to the spikes. I also changed the wall sprite from a white square to a grey tile. These small changes helped the levels look more visually appealing and the game feel closer to a finished product. Unfortunately, this is when the simultaneous crunch and procrastination set in. You see, it was easy to list the things I had left to do before the game was finished. I just needed a tutorial, options menu, the rest of the levels, and an itch.io page before I could submit it for the game jam. And with how productive I've been, I knew it shouldn't be hard for me to do all those things and even have a day or 2 to spare. Sadly, there was an oversight. You see, this was the code that runs the moment the game was launched. The most noteworthy thing it does is store all of the level information, and because of that, I used code comments to plan what mechanics would be introduced at what levels. Because I was stubborn, I wanted 50 levels and 9 objects. I couldn't have less than 50 levels because, well, how would I fit 9 objects in 30 levels without the player feeling overwhelmed? And I couldn't have less than 9 objects because, well, not introducing any new mechanics in nearly 50 levels would bore the player. My stubbornness forced me into a difficult position, and I felt like I couldn't continue making the game until I knew what those remaining objects would be so that I could plan level progression. I would later scrap the idea of an object that spawns boxes, leaving 4 new ideas that I'd have to come up with very soon if I'd want to continue making the game. Day 5 was when I did something revolutionary, something I've never done before. I went outside. Jokes aside, I was talking with a friend of mine who was interested in my game, and during our conversation, I came up with the remaining objects that I needed. So, I present to you the various obstacles of Grav-Stack. The spike, the saw, the button saw, the fire that behaves like a spike, and the fire that behaves like a saw. After a bit more planning and level design, I ended the day on a good note. Unfortunately, there's not much more to say about this day that won't be covered in day 6, so I guess we'll just have to go to day 6. In what felt like no time at all, it was the second to last day of game development and the last chance I had for someone else to play the game. This day was mostly playtesting and level design. I planned to have all 50 levels done before this day, but I only made about half of the levels at this point. So everything past about level 25 wasn't actually playtested before release. Whoops! After playtesting, I implemented the tutorial and options menus before making some more levels and planning when mechanics should be introduced. I also added a new mechanic, the turn limit, which technically exists in every level but is set to 99 by default and only becomes a problem once it's set to a lower value when you have to start beating levels in a certain amount of moves, which introduces a new mechanic without adding a new object to the game. After adding the ability to change the level music and turn limit in the editor, as well as adding some helpful information in the top right, the editor was now in its final form. With this new editor, I finished the day by making some more levels. With every mechanic implemented, the editor finished, a complete plan of what mechanics are introduced in what levels, I went to sleep hopeful that tomorrow would be a productive day. And so, it was day 7, the final day of the game jam and the final day of Grav-Stack's development, at least for the time being. Submissions would close tomorrow morning, so I had to make sure everything was in order and submitted before I went to sleep. I made some quality of life improvements, like adding text that shows controls during levels. Most of day 7 passed by, and no new levels were being added to the game. The sun set, and with it the panic started setting in. 28 levels had been made, and I needed to make 22 more in just a couple of hours. As you can expect, the last 20 or so levels were rushed, and if I could go back now, I would definitely remake at least 10 of them. As bad as rushing out levels for a puzzle game sounds, I still had a game to submit, so I wasn't that upset about it. I double checked that everything was in the game, and that everything was in working order, and that there wasn't anything important missing, and after double checking everything, I uploaded it to itch.io. I made a game page, and at nearly 5 AM in the morning, I submitted Grav-Stack to Untitled Game Jam number 89 before going to sleep for the final time of the game jam. I submitted my game, but the jam wasn't over. Throughout the next week, I played and reviewed the other submissions, read comments and responded to feedback, watched the showcase livestream to see what they thought of everyone's submissions, and most importantly, I got the idea to make a video documenting my experiences. I learned a lot from participating in this game jam, and I'm glad I persevered through that final night to ensure I had a complete game to submit. The feedback I got was rewarding. More people played and commented on Grav-Stack than any other game I made, and although I didn't end up winning the game jam, it was never my intention to place high before going into it. My objective was always to practice, learn, push myself, and as always, have fun. I hope you enjoyed this video where I recounted my week-long game jam journey. I do not regret joining Untitled Game Jam 89, and I'm excited to see what I'll make for Untitled Game Jam 90. But until then, I hope you took something away from this video, and be sure to stay tuned for whatever I end up making next time. Good night, everyone.